So good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Chapman. I'm a Planning and Enabling Manager here at Homes England. I'm delighted to be working with colleagues in our local government capacity centre to bring you this morning's session of the Winter Learning Programme. Today's topic is the Planning Inspectorate's Introduction to Working with Local Authorities, and it's one of a series of knowledge sharing sessions that cover topics that you've told us are of interest to you and you would like to know more about. We've got some excellent speakers from both Homes England and the Planning Inspectorate for you this morning, and I hope you're going to get lots out of this session. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a little bit more about Homes England's Winter Learning Programme. The programme is brought to you by the Local Government Capacity Centre. The slide on the screen summarises who we are and what we do. We launched the centre following extensive research and consultation with you across local government, and with a whole range of other partners to determine where local authorities need the most support and how this can be best delivered. So we've got today's agenda on screen there, which will give you a bit of a breakdown of what we're going to be covering today. We're starting off with Lindsay Richards, Homes England's Head of Town Planning and the 2023 Vice President of the Royal Town Planning Institute. Richard Schofield, Head of Planning Inspector Profession, will then go on to give us a bit of an introduction about PINs. Simon Berkeley, the professional lead at PINs, will then cover local plans and why they're important. Richard will come back in and give us a bit of a do's and don'ts on planning appeals. And then Jackie Anderson, the operations lead at PINs, will give us some really great info on the PINs digital services, and then we'll move on to a Q&A and a little bit of feedback at the end. So next slide, please. So just following on from the agenda, this slide gives you a bit of an overview of kind of the key things we'll be learning about today. So we'll be looking at the planning inspector's role in housing and regeneration. We'll look at the barriers to effective and efficient appeals and local plan examinations, and cover some of the best practical advice for local plan examinations and advice for you as local authority officers for defending appeals. We'll then take a look at some of the ways the inspectorate are using digital services to improve the processing of appeals, followed by the Q&A. Next slide, please. So without further ado, we'll get into the presentation, and I will now hand you over to Lindsay. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm Lindsay Richards. As Adam says, I'm Head of Town Planning here at Homes England, and also a great honour to represent the RTPI this year as its Vice President, a role I hope I will fulfil to support the profession and the built environment, to raise the profile of the profession, to ensure that we deliver outstanding placemaking that creates inclusive, healthy, prosperous, sustainable and happy communities. And that's something that we share with the Planning Inspectorate, as I just want to just spend a few minutes covering. So we've got an exciting session this morning with the Planning Inspectorate. They're going to set out their stall and show us how they can support us in our dealings with appeals and actual examinations. So next slide, please. So actually, what's in a name? And I think Shakespeare asked this question in Romeo and Juliet, and he uses this to signify that a name, so it's Montague in the case of Romeo and Juliet, can never fully capture the full meaning of what that something is. So the word planning inspector, I know from my history of my career, perhaps leads some of us to some feelings of anxiety, apprehension, and maybe some angst. And that's because it's associated with appeals, processes, and procedures. So today's session, we're going to demonstrate how PINs support a planning system and how they are at the heart of delivering houses in the right place, supported by the right infrastructure and community facilities. So if you actually look at the PINs website, it clearly sets out the purpose. And this is going to be covered by our speakers today, which are Richard, Simon and Jackie. And in simple terms, we've seen it's dealing with planning appeals, national infrastructure, planning applications, examinations of local plans, and other planning related and specialist casework. But the website goes on to say, and this is what I want us to remember, is that PINs share their expertise of our customers, communities and businesses, local and national government, to enable good planning outcomes. And there we have it, good planning outcomes. And that's a shared purpose, I would say, with most of us on this call. The link on the slide, and we'll share these slides after the session today, and so that will take you to a short YouTube video. And actually that helps to explain the work of PINs, the purpose, and actually the values that they work to. And as a way of an introduction, I just want to repeat a few quotes in that short video. And I think a lot of us will relate to this. And that video talks about recognising a fair planning makes great places. And it talks about green spaces being protected, protecting species, setting social, economic and environmental priorities, and an inspectorate that is fair in listening to differing views. So I think a quick word just to sum up really in terms of Homes England and Planning Inspectorate and how we work with the Planning Inspectorate. We're both funded by DLUC, but we have very separate roles. And our role with the Planning Inspectorate really is around that as a landowner and a land promoter. And we engage on that basis the same as our development partners, i.e. we will consider the merits of progressing an appeal. But there's a further role also, and that's as Homes England as a prescribed body, and this sits with the duty to cooperate. And that's really where we may well engage on strategic cross-boundary issues. So a final word before we get into the session, and that's around the planning reforms, which we know are being progressed currently. So today's presentation is in the context of current processes. And what I would ask you to do is please respect our speakers. I'm going to ask you to avoid asking questions or making comments or asking for any comments on the proposed changes. So really focusing on current practices at the moment. And I thank you for that if you keep to that. So now it remains for me to hand over to Richard Schofield. Richard's going to cover a quick introduction to the speakers and to the work of the Planning Inspectorate.
That's great. Thank you very much, Lindsay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Richard Schofield. I'm head of Planning Inspector profession at the Planning Inspectorate, which means I am the most senior planning inspector at PINS. Simon Barkley, who's on the call, is a member of my team, and I work very closely with Jackie Anderson, my colleague from our operational side of things, who is also one of our most senior members of staff, dealing with the delivery of our casework. If I can have the next slide, please. I thought it would be helpful just to give you all a brief introduction to PINS. I'm sure many of you are well aware of who we are and what we do, but a lot of people don't appreciate the scope of it. So we are, as Lindsay has said, an executive agency of the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. We work very closely with them on a number of things, including planning reform at the moment, which, as has been said, we don't intend to talk about. We have about 350 inspector posts. Not all of them work full time, so we have about 400 home-based inspectors and 419 staff in our office in Bristol, Temple Key House, which you will no doubt have seen on various letters and so forth that appear in your inboxes. We also have an apprentice programme, so we have a number of which we work with the RTPI and the University of the West of England, which we sponsor a number of young planners through their masters and towards their RTPI membership. And we also have 85 non-salaried inspectors, or planning appeals delivery suppliers, as they are now called, who work for us on a fee per case basis. If you're interested in that, do let me know. And they sort of help us deal with peaks and troughs in appeals coming in. We have 3 service areas. One is obviously this kind of bread and butter appeals issue. We have around 20,000 appeals a year coming into PINS. A lot of people don't appreciate that, albeit in the context of the number of planning applications made each year, it's a drop in the ocean. The number of appeals, number of applications that actually appeal is very small. But so, to get through that obviously is quite significant. That's on a huge range of stuff, from your sort of inverted commas bog standard Section 78 appeals to high hedges, public rights of way, coastal access appeals, tree preservation order works, compulsory purchase orders. We deal with stuff called necessary way leaves, which is to do with the Electricity Act, common land applications, drought orders, lawful development certificates, a huge range of stuff. You name it, we are generally the go-to agency in government to pick up these things. Our second service is applications, which deals with national infrastructure projects, which you may well know as NSIP. That is obviously generally stuff around railways, roads, power stations, large-scale renewable energy projects, big infrastructure things. We've currently got 13 live examinations relating to that and about 70 odd at pre-application stage. So again, a huge area of work for us. And then finally, examinations or local plans, which Simon Barkley, my colleague, will be talking about later on. We've got around 60 live examinations at the moment, with many more on the books. We do pre-examination, pre-plan visits to local planning authorities to give advice and guidance in relation to those issues. So again, a big area of work, notwithstanding that it's maybe a bit of a pause on things at the moment as the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill progresses. So that's pretty much all I'm going to say. Part of the purpose of today is to give you an introduction to us, how we can work better together, but also to say that we are human. I know inspectors often seem aloof and perhaps remote. We're not. We're nice people. We're approachable. If you've got questions, we'll do our very best to answer them in as candid a way as we can. So please don't feel that you can't. I think I will stop at that point and hand over. I think it's to Simon to talk about local plans. So. Indeed, there we go. Over to you, my friend.
It is seamless. Thanks very much, Rich. Okay. So as Rich said, I'm Simon Barkley. I'm a planning inspector, and I have undertaken an awful lot of local plan examinations, around 20 something odd, I think, something in of that kind of order. And I am the Inspectorate's professional lead for local plans, which to my great surprise means that I'm PINS's expert in local plans. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. So I should probably start off with an apology to those of you joining today who are planners. So it's a bit of a presentation of two halves, and the first half really is setting out some slightly more sort of basic stuff, a bit of an introduction in a way to what local plan examinations actually are, what they're all about. So those planners amongst you will, it's probably teaching you to suck eggs, but hopefully at the end I'll have something that's perhaps a little more interesting for you, which is around the sort of do's and don'ts, if you like, of local plan examinations. So to the basics first of all then. Local plans, why are they important? I can hear the policy planners among you guffawing at the impertinence of the question. So this is my take on this. So in short, well, I've got quite a bit of detail on the slide there, but in short, I think two reasons why local plans are so very, very important. First of all, they make some very big, very important decisions about the development of a district, of a local authority's area. As the slide says, they set the strategic planning framework. This is about which towns or villages you have in your local authority area should grow the most, which should only grow a little bit, which shouldn't grow at all, perhaps. So these are very big, difficult, politically charged, and frankly emotional questions that local plans have to set out the answers for, particularly as part of that is setting out the areas that should be developed, where there should be new housing development to meet needs for the next 15 or so years, and areas that shouldn't be developed. So local plans, amongst other things, amongst a whole raft of other things, set out where greenbelt should be. So these are very, very sort of politically charged and emotional, as I say, subjects, and the local plan is the place where the big decisions around those things need to be made. Also, the second strand to all of that is that the local plan sets out the policies that should be applied when the local authority in the first instance or the inspectorate appeal makes decisions about the planning application or the appeal as it may be. And in and amongst all of that is the notion that we have in this country what we refer to as a plan-led system. So the plan makes those big decisions, it sets out the policies that must be applied, as I say, but and this is a key thing for me, I think, underpinning all of that is legislation. As you can see on the slide, I've got two references there to the 2004 Act. And from the bottom box, you will see that planning applications should be decided, in short, on the basis of what the local plan says. So the local plan is the primary document. It's the starting point that any decision maker should look at when reaching a decision about a planning proposal, and that's key. You know, you hear a lot of talk, obviously, about national policy. Yeah, I'll probably get shot for saying this, but national policy does not have that same statutory footing that the local plan has, and that is why the local plan is the starting point for all planning decisions that a local authority makes. You'll see in the bottom box there, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Well, that's where national policy comes into consideration, because national policy is a material consideration. Yeah, that's probably all I want to say on that slide. So if I could have the next one, please, that would be great. Thank you very much. So yeah, as this is being facilitated by Homes England today, I thought I probably ought to focus a little bit on homes, otherwise I might get in trouble. And also, it's a really very important aspect, obviously, for very probably obvious reasons. It's a really very important aspect of a local plan. So what does a local plan then do about delivering new homes? Well, first of all, the first task for a local authority is to identify what the need for new housing is over a fixed time horizon, and ideally that ought to be 15 years for a whole range, as the slide says, of different types of housing and accommodation. And having identified that need, it then should set out the numerical requirement that it's setting out to actually deliver, and that may or may not be the same as the need. That might be a higher number for whatever reason, or it might be a lower number. As I think I mentioned before, so the local plan will also allocate land that's actually on a map, drawing a line around a piece of land that will be allocated for, say, in this example here, for housing. So it actually allocates housing land to meet the requirement that the plan's setting out to meet. And as well includes policies about certain types of housing. So the proportion of new housing that needs to be affordable housing, for example, to help meet the need for affordable housing in the local authority's area. And, you know, all of this, bringing all of this together, they provide certainty in the market, and I'm sure everyone on this call will understand the importance and, frankly, the value in that, to ensure that developers are engaged. They know what they're doing in that particular local authority area. They know where they can build and where they can't, and local plans provide that certainty, which in and of itself, I think, helps to bring, hopefully, new homes forward. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Okay, so Yeah, this is a little bit about the examination process. Yeah, it's not the best slide, and I apologise. That's basically down to my lack of IT skills. But so this slide is supposed to read from left to right, top to bottom. So starting with submission and ending up with adoption in the bottom right-hand corner there. So yeah, this, I have to say, I almost sort of put in for my own amusement. This is sort of the examination process nirvana, and I have to say that a lot of examinations get an awful lot more complicated than this slide might suggest. If it interests you, I have actually mapped out the process in a lot of detail on the kind of most difficult case scenario. It'd be far too complicated though to share here, which is why I've opted for a much simpler, optimistic view on this slide. So in short, then, the examination process begins with the local authority submitting its plan into the examination, then gets given an inspector who goes about the business of reading all of the evidence, reviewing the plan, what it says, what it's setting out to do, looking at all the evidence that underpins it. That is in essence, well, why is this plan looking to do this? Why is it looking to grow the local authority area over here but not over here? And then, having undertaken that rather simple task, then setting out what the main issues are going to be for the examination going forward. That is the most sort of controversial stroke complicated issues that the examination needs to focus on. Having then done that, the inspector in almost all examinations will hold what for me has always been the most exciting part of the process, will hold hearings. So in normal times, at least, that is about turning up face to face, asking everyone involved in the examination a lot of questions to get to the nub of why, for example, the council wants to do one particular thing and why another bunch of people on the other side want them to do precisely the opposite. So yeah, and throughout that kind of hearings process, the inspector will be considering whether or not the plan needs to be modified in some way. And at the end of all of that, there will be a list of main modifications that the inspector considers necessary, which will then be consulted on before the inspector finally produces his or her report to the local authority, which marks the end of the actual examination and the inspector's input to it. Hands the report to the local authority, who then, by and large at least, votes to adopt the plan. So, as I say, that is a very, very straightforward, simplified explanation of the examination process. So yeah, so throughout all of that process, you might be wondering, right, so what's the inspector for then? Well, in short, and again, very, very simply put, the inspector has just two jobs, easiest job in the world. And that is to make sure that the plan is legally compliant, and a prime example of that you will probably have heard of, even if you're not a planner, is the duty to cooperate. So that there are numerous things set out in regulations that the inspector that's legislation, regulations, I mean secondary legislation, that the inspector will be checking have been complied with, and the other strand, and primarily the focus for most examinations at least, is to be sure that the plan as submitted is sound, and that's a key word that you'll hear throughout examinations, whether or not it is sound based on the national policy tests of soundness. And I've given the headlines to each one of the tests of soundness there. I'm not going to read them out, but under each of those headings, the positively prepared, justified, effective, and consistent with national policy, I'd invite you to have a look at the NPPF, which does set out under each one precisely what those things mean. Next slide, please. So that's the sort of very rather quick canter through what local plans sort of are and what the examination process kind of is and what it's all about. So I'm going to move on in a minute to talk about what I think helps inspectors at local plan examinations and the flip side of that, what doesn't. But I thought first it would be good to hear from you. If I can invite you to participate in the poll in the chat, and I'll have a look and see what comes through if I can.
Yeah, Simon. So there's a few things coming through: evidence-based, clear, consistent LPA, clarity of information, proportionate evidence, emotional discussion, public consultation, data and evidence. Those are kind of the main things, evidence-based being the most popular. Okay,
excellent. And I would say rightly so. To those of you that put those answers, you're not going to be surprised that those are actually on my list that I'm going to move on to. So maybe if I move on to the next slide now, please. That's great. Thank you very much. So I've got a couple of slides, as I say, about what helps and what doesn't. These aren't exhaustive aren't exhaustive lists, but yeah. The first one for me is a big one. The genuinely working with box on the slide there that hopefully you can all see. As I say, look, the job of the local plan is to tackle big issues in the local authority area, and a local authority can't do that by itself. It needs to work with those bodies, those people listed in that box, and many others, to really begin to understand and address the issues that the authority faces over the sort of plan period, over the sort of 15 years, the 15-year plan horizon that the plan has to look over. So if you are drawing up a local plan, helping your local authority to do that, then please do genuinely work with others and take on board those views. I think through the poll, someone was mentioning there evidence. Absolutely right. It's that is something that obviously the inspector is going to be scrutinizing, looking at very carefully to see that the evidence is there to justify the approach that the plan's taking. So please, do make sure that it's up to date. Anything that you are going to need to justify because it's a particularly controversial or tricky issue for your authority, please make sure that you've got good evidence for the approach you're taking in relation to that issue. And sustainability appraisal as well. If you are drawing up a sustainability appraisal, please do be open and genuinely consider through your sustainability appraisal what the reasonable alternative approaches might be. If it seems to you that it's reasonable, my strong advice would be essay it, if I can put it that way, because if you haven't, that's going to get picked up through the examination by the inspector, and more likely than not, you'll be asked to do that work in any event during the examination process. So please preempt that, and do make sure that your sustainability appraisal that covers all the reasonable alternatives that the authority had to consider. And the other two boxes on there, be open to changes and thinking pragmatically, and don't be too defensive. Really, these are about, look, throughout this entire process, it might not always seem like it, but the inspector is your friend. He or she is there, charged with the task of getting the local plan through the examination to adoption, if it is possible. That is what he or she is aiming to do. So if you bear that very much in mind, in fact, at the forefront of your mind, and as I say, do be open. Don't be defensive. I know from personal experience that's quite difficult. You've spent a lot of years working on your local plan. You're immersed in the entire thing, and to have someone coming along, prodding and poking it, and asking you difficult questions can be quite difficult. But please remember, that's the role of the inspector, a friend who is there to help you through the process to getting an adopted plan in place. Next slide, please. Yeah, fronting up to issues. Yeah, please don't. If there is a particular issue in your area, don't pretend it doesn't exist. This is about making the big decisions. That's what the plan should do. It does need to front up to issues. And if you haven't done that in drawing up your local plan, you can be sure that somebody else is going to bring the issue up. And again, more likely than not, the inspector will require that you do something about it, whether that's produce an additional bit of work or whatever. So all of that can cause delays to your examination. So front up to them right up front in the first place, before you bring your plan to submit your plan for examination. Yeah, so think as well about helping the inspector. So summary topic papers, for example, on unique or controversial or difficult issues. In the olden days, before technology was quite where it is today, an inspector appointed to a local plan would receive boxes and boxes and boxes of evidence to go through. Make it easy for the inspector by putting the difficult stuff down on short topic papers that point him or her to the relevant bits of evidence with a summary of what that evidence concludes and why. Make life easy for your inspector, and that will help you achieve a smooth, efficient examination. And for the same reason, as I mentioned earlier, among the important things to do working with others, if you've worked with other people, you can show that you have by drawing up with them statements of common ground or memoranda of understanding, so that the inspector can see precisely what it is that you do agree about. And almost as important, statements of common ground or memoranda of understanding setting out the areas where there's any disagreement can be almost just as helpful to your inspector in getting to the nub of the issues. In terms of scheme of delegation, that's particularly in terms of the local plan hearings. There is nothing more frustrating than planning officers turning up to local plan hearings, but haven't been given the authority to agree to modifications to the plan, and making sure that you've got a decent scheme of delegation in place before that, again, can be really, really helpful. Yeah, I've put here good knowledgeable officers and keeping them. A good knowledgeable planning officer is a very valuable asset, and I know a lot of local authorities do recognise that. Some, sadly, don't. So if you are in a position of authority and within your council, please do all you can to keep your knowledgeable officers with you and at the forefront of the examination process. And yet, finally, especially for the local plan hearings, Yeah, if you do have a particularly controversial plan that you know is going to be difficult through your examination process, a good KC, a good barrister, can be very, very invaluable as well. On to the next, and I think this is the final slide. Yeah, less helpful. Well, basically the opposite of everything that I've said on the previous two slides. To be particularly well, to be honest with you, it doesn't help if you look to introduce significant changes to your plan on the point of submission. So that is for the planners out there, between your Reg 19 consultation and submission. That can get really very difficult because your inspector is charged with examining the plan as submitted, and significant changes on the side can be quite complicated. So in certain circumstances, it can even be beneficial to rerun your Reg 19 consultation before submission. I've said quite a bit about sustainability appraisal already, so I won't dwell on that anymore. But again, okay, I put here opaque site selection methodology. Again, this is about clarity and helping your inspector understand precisely what it is that you are proposing and why. And I have to say that in my experience, it's not always clear how a local authority has selected the sites for development that it has. Simply just set it out, as I said previously, perhaps on a topic paper or something like that. A flow diagram in the case of site methodology often helps. So again, that's about sort of, you know, making life as easy as you possibly can for the inspector. Yeah, and my last point is specifically about local plan reviews, particularly single issue reviews. We do get plans submitted that are, for example, just reviewing the housing requirement and not necessarily also reviewing the housing supply at the same time. They can get quite difficult. It needs to be clear in that sort of example what the scope is, which bits of the adopted plan that you actually are updating and which bits you're not, so the inspector knows which areas that he or she is looking at and which bits he or she is not to go near, because that's out of scope of the examination. And just on a practical point, yeah, this is a recent sort of bugbear. That's why I've included this here. Please don't submit plan reviews with track changes, because this just makes everything confusing for everybody. And if your inspector receives the plan and doesn't really know what he or she is looking at, then you're going to be off to a very, very slow start and potentially a very prolonged and laborious examination. So I think, and unless I've forgotten something, that brings me to the end of my part. Is that right? And I believe if we move on to the next slide, that I am passing from me to you back to Rich.
Well, thanks, Simon. Sorry, I'm mid-answering a question, so I was caught on the hop a bit there. But just if Simon's still listening, first of all, that was most excellent. Secondly, there are still some outstanding questions in the chat that I've left to you because you'll know better than I am, notably around sustainability plans wanting to go above and beyond basic inverted commas sustainability issues. If you could pick that up, that'd be great. Thank you very much. Okay, so if I could have the next slide, please. I'm going to touch on planning appeals, do's and don'ts. So very first question, straight off the bat, because we do like these. What do inspectors, or what do you think we find most annoying when preparing for appeals? If you can have a quick look. Oh, there's 3 options. I hadn't realised I'd put those in. But so please do vote. That'd be great. Thank you. I guess I will be informed of the results in the near future. I should say I'm going to gallop through this fairly quickly because Simon's content was excellent, and so we let him preachify for longer than he was allowed. But hopefully you'll have found it useful. And because nature abhors a vacuum, I will just keep talking until somebody tells me that there are some results that I can talk about. Okay.
Yes, we've got some great poll results, and I think the winner is receiving information late was the most popular one chosen.
Well, it's true. I mean, it was a bit of an unfair question, actually. So if you could move on to the next slide, that'd be great, because actually all three are very irritating, to be honest. But receiving stuff late is a significant bugbear for obvious reasons. You expect to think that they're all prepped and ready to go for the appeal, and suddenly a whole new load of stuff comes in. The temptation usually is to ditch it, and we will be taking an increasingly hard line on that. So there you go. Provide information on time. It is at the top. So there's nothing more irritating than having to completely revise your questions or think about what it is you're actually looking at, because stuff suddenly come in that people didn't have time to do in the first place. Clearly, we're fully aware of the pressures on local government. Certainly, before I joined PINS, I was head of planning in a local authority, so I'm acutely aware of the issues involved there. But yes, the more you can keep to time, the better. Thank you. Statutory duties met again. Often, well, not often, but we will regularly get evidence that people haven't been notified properly, or the statutory kind of notifications haven't been sent out. The content of certain letters isn't quite right under the regulations, which means that we will often have to postpone or junk events completely, which has happened to me on a number of occasions. So it's a fairly easy thing to do. Just make sure that you and or your support teams have checked the right boxes and make sure you've done the right things. And in terms of keeping evidence concise, focused, well structured, well, I mean, make sure you get all your points across, but you don't need to go massively to town on it. And you don't need to sort of repeat reams and reams of policy and guidance and so forth. Inspectors will be aware of that, or you can just supply something like that as an appendix. You will often find that, or inspectors will often find that we get statements of case or proofs of evidence, and you skim through the first 30 odd pages before you actually get to the three that matter, which is the counsel or indeed the appellant's case. So. And make sure that stuff's easy to find in them. Keep it well structured, keep paragraphs numbered and the like, which is helpful, and stick to your points. Say a bit like Simon was saying, address the main points of contention and don't try to defend the indefensible. I know that can be difficult sometimes, particularly if you're looking at a member overturn, but other times, if you stick to your guns rigidly with something that is not a particularly strong argument, that's not helpful. The inspectors aren't stupid and they will see through it straight away. So focus on what it is that is in dispute between the two of you, which is this point about statements of common ground, increasing bugbear of PINS, not used as they should be. We want more than just the kind of, we agree that the site looks like this and that the key policies are that. Use it as a constructive approach to narrow the issues between you. I say it's not going to be something to catch you out on, and I appreciate that appellants will often try or want, as do LPAs, to box things off, but that's fine. You can still disagree in a statement of common ground. You can have areas of disagreement, but the more that you can bring it in for something the inspector to focus on, the better. I skipped over follow policy and guidance, including your own properly. We often find that people will take bits out of policy, national and local, or guidance, and chuck it in as evidence. And again, the inspector's not stupid. They will read the whole thing and take it in the round. So if you've picked something that supports your case, but the rest of the policy doesn't, then be aware of that. And also, we often find that even local planning authorities will interpret their policy in a very different way to that in which it was written, perhaps sometimes to fit the case rather than vice versa. So again, just apply things as they're written. When it comes to inquiries, know and understand your case and that the appellant. Again, I appreciate the time pressures there, but the more you're on top of stuff, the better. The less you're likely to be caught out, the more you will know what's coming, and the more confident and relaxed you will feel as a witness. And the more you know your appellant's case, the more you'll be able to refer to it to rebut issues. So it is worth spending time on that. Again, anticipate what you might be asked. If you're going to be cross-examined and that there's stuff that you think is a bit iffy, then either be ready to concede on that, or to make sure that you've got a good answer lined up. And the final issue, agree and justify planning obligations and conditions. The real problem for a lot of inspectors is, we get a huge amount of conditions. Are they really necessary? Sometimes, I remember, again, I appreciate this from my days, you'll get stuff coming in from various departments saying, we want this applied, we want this applied, this is a standard condition. I think, well, why? If we didn't have this condition, would we have to dismiss the application? Just think very carefully and justify it, and make sure that everything in the condition is there. That you've said why it's, what you want to happen, how, and by when, and then how you will know it's been implemented. There are often bits missing, an implementation clause, for example. And in terms of planning obligations, again, look at the tests, the SIL tests, the SIL reg tests, and make sure you've justified each planning obligation. Ideally, something setting that out for the inspector is very helpful. The table that has the obligation, says why it's needed, why the amount of funds is appropriate, and the justification for it. Again, the inspector can then go through and just tick stuff off. Okay, next slide, please. Brilliant, thank you very much. So, what not to do? The first one is slightly flippant, but if your inquiries, don't start lecturing the inspector about stuff. Council are particularly, or some particularly irritating about this. Inspectors are, again, pretty smart people. They'll have done this many times before. Well, obviously, there'll be a time when they haven't, but most inspectors will have done a lot of hearings, a lot of inquiries. Don't sort of try and tell them their job, because that will irritate them extremely quickly. Don't provide information about which we're already aware. It's kind of my point again. We know national policy. We will have read your local plan policies. We don't need to hear it all again. And again, don't suddenly provide information about which we're not aware. There's nothing, again, more annoying than pitching up to an event and suddenly being presented with a huge stack of documents that you suddenly want to rely on, because we will need to stop, we will need to read them, the opposing party will need to read them, and the inspector will be thinking, well, why the hell wasn't this considered before? So again, just be mindful about your planning for your appeal and what information you think you're going to need to rely on, where and when. Obviously, some stuff can suddenly crop up, a legal ruling at the last minute, but generally you should be on top of things. And again, this is my point, don't ask for things you can't justify. If you're wanting a planning obligation about something because somebody thinks it's a good idea, then you're not going to get it. Make sure that you have a clear basis in policy for it, that, as I say, the sum of money, if that's what is involved, is appropriate. Otherwise, if you can't justify it against the regs, it's not gonna come through, and we get all kinds of peculiar stuff that really, clutching at straws sometimes. Again, don't try and make your policies say things that they don't. My point about taking things out of context or trying to replay them in a slightly different fashion when it's obvious that what you're hoping it says it isn't what it actually says. And again, don't just make statements or use assertion. Inspectors will want to see evidence to back stuff up rather than just a kind of, well, as I say, assertion or assumption. You should always be able to justify what you're saying with regards to policy or on the ground evidence. And just as a vague comic turn, don't repeat information. Again, you'll get a statement of case or something which says the same thing about 4 times. Say keep it focused. Get your key points across and leave it at that. Cover off things that you think might need addressing from a third party, for example, or local residents that you might need to cover off. But other than that, I say don't just repeat reams and reams of stuff, notably national policy and guidance. So as I've deliberately rattled through that, looks like there's some questions in the chat which I will be very happy to try and answer. Whilst I think. I hand over to Jackie. Yay, brilliant. I will shut up.
Thanks, Richard. Morning, everyone. My name's Jackie Anson, and I'm the Appeals Service Manager in the Planning Inspectorate. And as Richard said, I work in the operations team and I report to the head of the Appeals Operations Service. My role is to work with internal operation case teams, our inspectors, the folk like Richard and Simon, and our digital partners, and also our external stakeholders. And my role really is to help to provide a new digital service for both the internal and external users. And I hope that I help to ensure that it meets all of our needs. A difficult balancing act sometimes, balancing against what inspectors want and what members of the public want to give us. So I just want to talk to you today a little about what and why we are changing. So why are we changing? So we're committed to improving our customer service. It's really hard to get hold of us. We don't give you very much information during the course of an appeal. Causes everybody lots of stress. So we want to improve that for everybody. We want to focus on getting the right information. So much as Richard alluded to earlier, are we getting the right stuff in? Are we getting too much? Are we getting too little? Just getting that right balance. We want to make submissions intuitive for all customers, so not just planning agents, but everybody, and that's part of the GDS and open digital tenant for the government. We want to reduce the number of invalid appeals submitted to us. Approximately 25% are invalid, and that's on top of the appeals that people try to submit out of time. So we want to reduce that. It causes us all a lot of time to deal with those. And we want to provide better updates on progress of appeals. So something that's more visual, something that's up to date, something that means you don't have to call us and you're not concerned about it. So the current service, why are we changing all of this? The current service, it's clunky, it's old-fashioned, it works, it's not pretty. And we get a lot of information electronically via the Appeals Planning Portal, the ACP, we'll know it as. But we also get a lot of email, even lots of paper. We have to match that up with the case files. If it's not in the right format, we have to digitize it. We want to make that a better service for you to be able to give us that electronically in the way that we want it. And part of that is we need to adhere to GDS, so Government Digital Standards. Some of you may have heard of that. And part of that is also making it accessible to everybody. So not just your planning agents or anybody else, but other people with accessibility issues. As I said, we want to reduce the number of invalid appeals and give the visual updates. Some of you will be aware of the RIPA and BOPS projects, and we are working together with our colleagues in those areas, and that's being facilitated for us by our colleagues in DLUC. So we are aware of it, we do keep an eye on it, we look at your technology, we look at your processes and procedures and things, how you go through that. So that's been really valuable information for us. Next slide, please. So this slide demonstrates an uptake of the service that we've already launched. So I just want to talk to you about that because some of you may not be very aware of it. We've done quite a quiet launch on it, and I just wanted to give you some of the reasons why. And tell you where we are now and how do we work to do this. We work in, if any of you worked in digital projects, you'll hear a lot of words that I use are used by those, but we work in journeys, looking at the users of the service itself, the process within the service, and each service journey achieves an outcome. So, for example, make a planning appeal is an achievement to an end of a journey. We've completed the journeys for Section 78 and HAS appeals, so householder appeals. Not all types of Section 78 appeals, I must say, but the householder appeals and what we would call a very straightforward Section 78 appeal can now be submitted through our new service by agents or appellants. We've already made this available in about 100 LPA areas, maybe some of you that have already started to see some of those appeals come through. And as I said, this slide demonstrates the uptake so far and what we've done. Why have we done it like that? Not just launched it? Well, we wanted to launch it in what we call a private beta, which is limited availability. And what we've launched is what we would call the minimum viable product, so the baseline submissions. This enables us to do, it's obviously tested beforehand, but do live tests. Does it come up with different things that we're not aware of? And we can gather feedback on these and monitor it more closely because we'll have a limited number of appeals coming through. And this is a reason why we've only used Section 78 and householder appeals, because what we can do is we can build on those and improve them and use that technology for other appeal types. And I should say, whilst we've only launched these, the design and the testing of other appeal types, so appeals with conditions, enforcement, listed building, that has all come through, and it's well into design and test and user testing. So whilst we have launched this in 100 LPA areas, we have not closed the ACP. So this gives the opportunity to either submit through the new service or through the old service. Reason we did this was a belt and braces approach, really. Let's do some dual running, and also because we're very much launching at the moment at unrepresented appellants, hence the more straightforward Section 78 and householder appeals. And agents tend to work through the ACP, have accounts with us, so we still wanted them to have that ability to use that service. I've got to say, we've had some really, really good feedback from unrepresented appellants. The appeals of unrepresented appellants are coming through. They're being dealt with very quickly. The information we get is really good. The feedback from agents has not been so positive. They've been supportive, but they have found that they're more used to the complex website. We're taking on board their feedback, but it's a very difficult balance because agents have got into a mindset of what they think we need. So talking back to Richard's slide, to what we actually need. So we're asking very simple questions, and they're saying, yes, but where do I submit something else, which actually is not what is needed for that type of appeal. So it's a real good balance, a real difficult balance on how we do that. But like I say, we're using the feedback to change it, improve it, and test it. I've met with many agents to talk this through with them. And as I say, they are supportive, but it's getting that balance right. We've launched the Submit an Appeal service, and the next release for appellants will be the process for final comments. That's coming in February, and that would complete the whole appellant's journey for those case types. So they submit the appeal, they read the documentation, and they submit their final comments. So what will you see as LPAs? You'll see a different type of appeal form. It doesn't look like an appeal form anymore. It's very clear. One of the things that is tested really well and people like is you can see the file names as they've been submitted under which question. So you can tick off, have you got those files? It's very clear. It doesn't look like an appeal form, so you don't have to read through all the stuff that's not relevant. And once an appeal is submitted, we do send comms to you to send an appeal, say that an appeal has been submitted, but we don't now send you the old PDF of the appeal form. We also don't send you, until the appeal's been validated, the reference number, so the old PINS reference number, the APP reference number. What we'll send you, say we have received an appeal, and we give you back your application number. Don't be too concerned about that. You can still contact us on that. You can drop us an email to the inquiries mailbox quoting those, and we can find the appeal. We can find the appeal from your reference, the postcode, and the appellant's name. So please don't be concerned about that as yet. Next slide, please. So how have we been working with local planning authorities? We've been talking to local planning authorities, got a number of authorities helping us. And what we're doing is we're moving on, or we're well established actually, into the design of the LPA journeys. So we've talked to planning officers. I'm not sure who generic Simon is, but Simon's told us what you need to do. So you need to know you've had an appeal. You need to know that you need to know when you need to submit the questionnaire and other case documentation. You need to provide us with all the data relating to the planning decision. You need to know who to contact us, and you need to find out the outcome of the appeals. And some of the things that we find you are saying to us that are causing you problems: you find it difficult to get the documents from the appellants, your case officers are time poor, and we give you tough deadlines and it's really difficult. You share one login, so only one person can possibly work on that account. You're sharing passwords. That's not good. It's not good for your security. It's not good for our security. And you're getting outdated information from us, so you're sharing outdated information from us, and we understand that it's quite difficult for you to sometimes update your systems. And you've got an IT department working over there, so we want to work at how we can fix some of these problems. A couple of things that are not on there, but we found that LPAs rarely use the ACP to submit documents and use emails. We get emails in, we get thousands of emails in, we have to link those up with those appeals. You know, you don't know who the case officer is, so it goes to somewhere else. We're really good at doing it. We very, very rarely lose documents, but we want to make that process easy for you, because if it's easy for you and it goes in the right place, it's easy for us. Some LPAs don't use the ACP for questionnaires, and this could cause us issues. You may use the question, you may answer the questions on the questionnaires, but email us the policies later. We have to marry those up. We put them in a case file for an inspector, and the inspector has to electronically flick through those. It all makes it difficult. So we want to look at a new way of doing that. Next slide, please. So these are just some of the challenges that I've talked about. Some other challenges: the start letter doesn't contain critical information and it needs to be updated. These are things that we have to go, oh, we have to fill this slot in and that slot in. And case officers are only human, they will forget. So it's not great. So we want to make it more dynamic. The model notification letters, they're often out of date because, again, your systems are difficult to update. So we want to look at solving that problem. You're not updating our updated PINS comms because it might go to the chief planning officer, who might not disseminate that down. So we're looking at ways through the LPA accounts where we give you on point updated communications. So next slide, please. So those are the challenges, and this slide demonstrates the tasks that you've told us we do. And on this slide, the things in dark blue are the designs and interventions that we've already designed. So we've designed the new LPA accounts and tested those, and they've landed really well. We've redesigned the LPA questionnaires, and that again is tested and landed really well. We're in the process of updating the submission the statement submission element. I say form there, but it's the element of doing it. And your final comments, as I said, once we do it for the appellants, that will work equally for local planning authorities. Shortly moving into the design of the LPA notification letters and the start letters, and seeing what improvements that we can make there. So next slide, please. Unfortunately, I can't show you any of those prototypes, but one of my slides is, if you want to get involved, please, I'll give you an email address. If you really want to get involved in the testing, or you want us to come and engage with your local authority so that we can show you something more dynamic and the prototypes, you know, please get in touch, because we're more than happy to do that. But just as a last slide and an overview, how will we improve the service for LPAs? I said, how will we? I hope we will improve the service for LPAs. We give you a new sign-on process that eliminates the shared login. An improved web form streamlines the questionnaire with conditional formatting. And what we mean by this is, you don't have to go through all 60 questions to get to the end. If it's not relevant, that you don't have to upload a listing because it's not relevant, and you say it's not listed, we don't ask for it anymore. You can also do it in chunks as well, and multiple people can work on it. So that's worked really well. So if you've got a case officer doing some of the more less planning tasks and planning officer working on it, you can work on it at the same time. So it's landed really, really well. Really proud of the questionnaire, actually. So we're going to streamline and update communications, at-point communications, more short messages. So this has happened. What will happen next is this, and this will happen then. That type of communications, rather than those very long, beautifully crafted letters that we send you, where you just go, oh, that's the date I need. Really important, small change but a big win, increase the file size limitations on the submission form, so that goes across the board for your statements as well. That doesn't mean we want you to submit more things. What it means is that our file constraints are quite small, but it enables it to happen better. And for us and for you, we've improved, we hope, the quality of submissions because the questions we ask are now nice and simple. They're clarifying questions. They use plain English. They use the GDS patterns that people are familiar with, so the start button and things like that. So that's my presentation. Now, I do have a question to ask. If we move on to the next slide, please. So other than the pain points and the challenges I've identified, are there any other steps PINS could take to improve our digital service? And I think someone's going to put a poll. No, nobody can think of anything else. Categorization of appeals. Here they come. Flexibility over meetings. System software. Yeah, the system software. Yeah. Chat functions. Yes, we've looked into that. Flexibility on dates. I can see a lot of flexibility coming on. Accessibility of inspectors. Information. Yeah, chat functions coming up big, and accessibility. Yeah, iDoc systems and software. Yeah, we do have technical constraints on what we can and can't move into, but what I will say, part of the open digital is also looking at where we can dovetail documents together, so all things in a data warehouse, and we can take those files very much in the future, but something we are looking at. So appeals process, yeah, we are looking at internal appeal processes actually to streamline some of those. So we will get a copy of these and what these word clouds, I think, and what I will do is take those back to the appeal teams, because it's always useful to see that sort of feedback and what it is that we want to improve. Function improvements, I can see there is a big one. So I think that's all from me, and I think I now hand over to. So my next slide, actually, I've got one more slide. I've forgotten. If we could move on to the next slide. How can you help? Be part of our panel of LPA representatives. Take part in our research. If you want to do that, there's the email address. Please get in touch with us. A lovely lady called Rachel, who helps me out on all of this work, will get back to you. Particularly, we want a panel of LPA representatives. You're all really busy, and it's good for us if we've got a panel that we can go to do some of our ask our questions as subject matter experts, and also for us to test things with and talk to you about. So that's me. Thank you for listening to my quick rattle through about what we're doing in the digital world. And I think I hand over to Richard, who's going to talk briefly about the future of PINS engagement.
Well, thanks, Jackie. Just say that Simon and I have been working through a ton of stuff in the chat. So if we've skipped questions inadvertently, apologies. We'll try and catch up on them. Anyway, I hope you found Jackie's presentation useful. Again, any help or advice or comments you can give us in relation to that, the better, to be honest. You know, we want as much user input as we possibly can. So just a very, very quick one here. As I say, we are keen, the Planning Inspectorate is keen to get out and about more. Some of you may have seen my ugly mug on various things over the last few months. So if we're keen to do outreach, I'm keen to make sure that we are selling, not literally, our training to the wider sector, and sharing our guidance, which we use for informing and training inspectors. And there's even talk of using inspectors to mediate, albeit that that would be hopefully before stuff comes into the appeal system generally. So if you're interested in any of that, as I say, if you think that some training on specific issues by a planning inspector would be useful, then, or you'd like, as I say, us to come out and talk about specific things to a group of stakeholders, to a group of LPAs, to a group of interest bodies. We're very happy to do that, albeit we won't talk about live casework. But if there are sort of areas of principle or practice you'd be interested in, then please let us know, because we have a huge amount of expertise at the Planning Inspectorate, and it seems daft to keep it locked away. So just drop me a line about any of that if you are interested. And I had another thought, but it's gone, so I will leave it at that. I think that's probably the end. I'm not sure. Are we straight to Q&As or not? But thank you very much for your claps. Adam, good man. Saving the day.
Richard. Thank you. So we've got some next slide, please. We've just got some kind of take-home messages there on that slide for you. Given timing, we're going to kind of try and canter through this quite quickly. You can see there's some links to some of the Inspectorate's YouTube channels there. Next slide, please. Right, we're going to go into a really quick Q&A now. So if we could, if the speakers could put their cameras on again, that would be great, please. We're going to keep this really concise. Simon, we've got the first question is for you, and it's a fairly light-hearted one. So, do you have a most memorable local plan examination?
Yes, North Hertfordshire and York, for different reasons.
Okay. Would you like to give us just a really brief reason?
I have to be careful with York. York is a live examination, so I can't say. Well, actually, I suppose in relation to both of them, I could say this, because they both, unfortunately, were very long and protracted examinations, and are etched indelibly now on my mind forever.
Great, thank you. Simon, it's another question for you, actually. So, specific to kind of examination. So if items of evidence and documentation arrive late, should the inspector not be disregarding that information as it states in the PINS guidance?
Well, it depends what you call late, frankly, and it depends what it is and where it's come from. I suspect that the local authority, for example, might not be particularly happy if it produced a very important bit of evidence during the examination and was told it couldn't submit it. It's a difficult question. The discipline in local plan examinations isn't and can't be as rigid as it is in planning appeals. Aside from anything else, one can't help but feel that rather a lot more, generally speaking, is at stake in a local plan examination. So it is a difficult question, and in short, it's for the inspector to take a view at the time.
Okay, great, thank you. Richard, just a question for you. Planners are sometimes nervous about statements of common ground because they feel it might be twisted or used against them during an inquiry or an examination. Is there any good practice guidance for preparing a statement of common ground in a straightforward, non-contentious fashion?
Well, three things actually. So I answered that in the chat, and I also answered the one you put to Simon, but in different contexts. So statements of common ground, just to say, we don't have, I don't think, any good practice guidance, but again, it's something that I want to address. We're also working with the Planning and Environment Bar Association at the moment to produce some sort of standard templates for statements of common ground, which set out expectations of what we and they will find helpful. So hopefully that will give people much more of a steer in terms of the content and context. But in short, don't be afraid of them. They don't have to be massively long tomes, but just a list of what's agreed and what's not agreed will be helpful to the inspector. And you're not going to throw your case out the window by potentially saying, oh, actually, on reflection, this is all right. Sorry, Simon, you wanted to chip in.
Only to say, I've seen disagreements about this before. You use simple, plain, concise English that says what you mean and means what you say and nothing else. Yes, agreed. Yeah.
Great. Thanks. Jackie, just a final question for you, because of timing, we're kind of skipping through this. How will the digital route make it easier for LPA officers to respond robustly to appeals? Some of the comments in the chat are saying it can be quite a time-consuming process. Jackie, you're on mute.
Oh, that's a typical inspector thing to do, isn't it? And a virtual event. I did have a quick chat to that, quick answer to that. Yeah, we've worked extensively with planning officers. So my slide with the Simon person, what we've done is we've designed it so that when you submit, it submits directly into the case, and the questions are shorter and quicker. So you can what it will do is it will guide you to where you need to put things. And then once you've submitted it, it's visible, so you don't have to check. The file sizes are bigger, so you still have to submit things to us, but the way that you submit it is much more intuitive. So think when you do your passport application, how you would go through and answer those types of questions. We're guiding the officers through that. So it'll be submit us your statement now. It's open for submission. This is where you put it, goes directly into the case, and you can submit everything with it rather than having to send emails because of our file systems. So, and if anybody wants to take, as I said in my presentation, if anyone wants me to come out to talk to their planning officers and the case officers and just give them a quick demonstration, I'm more than happy to do that. What I don't want is bombarded with loads of opinions, though, because I've got interaction designers and user researchers who do that properly, but happy to come and talk to them.
Fantastic, thank you, Jackie. Okay, so we will wrap the Q&A up there because we're short of time, and thank you everyone and our speakers who have done a great job of answering loads of those questions in the chat. Thank you very much. As we finished just bang on time, I think, here, so that's great. I'd just like to thank our speakers again, and everyone for their contributions today. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.